Brexit has been hard on a lot of people, from the Eastern Europeans who felt they had to leave the country in the wake of a backlash against them, to the fishermen who have seen their catches shrink and their jobs disappear. Of course, let's not forget the Northern Irish who've been caught in political limbo, threatening their hard-won peace. It's been tough on all of them. But there is a danger that we overlook the real victims of this referendum. I'm talking about the ruling class Brexit headbangers. They've been having pretty public breakdowns and begging us to pity them. Sarah Vine has provided the latest instance of this phenomenon. She's a columnist for the Daily Mail and the ex-wife of Tory Cabinet Minister Michael Gove. She was an ardent supporter of the Leave campaign, but despite being on the winning side, now she wants your tears. Brexit cost me friendships and my marriage. I pray Rishi can finally end this uncivil war. Now, it's well known that Sarah Vine and Michael Gove had a big falling out with David Cameron and his wife Samantha over Brexit. Cameron had promised an EU referendum in the Conservatives' 2015 manifesto, but he hadn't expected his close friend Gove to campaign for Leave. That was a fact that Gove and Vine kept secret from the Camerons. In her article, Vine describes the end of that relationship. I should have told David sooner that Michael was going to campaign for Leave. Perhaps if he had known from the start, it wouldn't have felt like such a betrayal to him and Samantha. But for me, it was a question of loyalty to my friends or loyalty to my husband. A horrible choice, which I am relieved and sad I will never have to make again. I knew in my heart which way Michael would go. I could have told them, but I didn't. I was afraid of what might happen. In trying to avoid confrontation, I stupidly created more. It's a lesson I won't forget. And she goes on. It's hard to articulate, but I feel that now, perhaps with the end finally in sight, the time is right. Not least because I do think that, in a way, my own turmoil reflects that of many others whose own families have been deeply divided by this issue, and in some cases, even torn apart like mine. Friends who have not spoken for years, relatives at war, neighbours at loggerheads. If Sunak's plan succeeds, there is every chance that some of these rifts may finally begin to heal. For me, sadly, it's too late. I think it runs too deep. The best I can really hope for is, like I said earlier, closure. I was too close to it all, burnt too badly. Ultimately, Brexit cost me not only some of my dearest friendships, but also my marriage. I believe some of that, right? I believe, some families and friendships were divided over their views on the EU. It was very divisive. But I'm not sure how much sympathy I have or anyone will have when the people in question are David Cameron, the Remainer who offered a referendum on Brexit just to help his career because he thought he would win it, and Michael Gove, the guy who led the Leave campaign, which was all based on a bunch of lies. I have no sympathy for these people. I don't think many people will. Never mind, though. Let's get back to the pity party. Maybe the next part will make you feel bad for. Losing my friends was a direct consequence of that vote back in June 2016 and happened overnight. The rest was more indirect and drawn out. It has more to do, really, with my own failings and how the fallout affected my mental health and to a large extent altered my personality irrevocably. Quite simply, I am not the person now that I was before all this began. I struggle to recognize myself at all. So many of the things I believed, the way I understood the world, it's all so different now. It feels like another life, another person entirely. The best way I can describe it is the difference between seeing the world through the eyes of a child and seeing how it really is, how people really are. Before Brexit, I had an easy sense of security, a Pollyanna-ish feeling that I belonged and always would. Now, not so much. And Vine ends with this. Truth is, there are some things that simply can't be fixed, that are for a variety of reasons broken beyond repair. When that happens, you can drive yourself nuts trying to glue bits back on, but they never stick. What my family went through as a result of Brexit, what happened with the Camerons and our wider group, how we became the focal point for Remainer anger, how people lost sight of who we really were and saw only what was said and written, the lies that were told, how it all was swept up by social media and spun around into a toxic tornado that seemed to engulf everything. In the end, it was all too much. Now remember, these are the people who in their incredibly civil, joyous relationship, before the heady days of Brexit, they spent 6 years implementing the violent austerity that killed a hell of a lot of people and made life miserable for millions. But that didn't make it to their cozy dinner parties. So when they were making everyone's life miserable with austerity, still everyone at their cozy dinner parties was like, oh, isn't it wonderful? Aren't we doing such a wonderful job? Yes, Sarah Vine, so lovely. So is Michael Cameron, David Cameron, it's Samantha Cameron. Oh, what a lovely bunch of people. And then you had this issue which divided the elite, and suddenly for the first time ever, they meet people who are a little bit angry with them because they live these insular lives where all the people they'd met before that don't really like working class people and are happy to make them poor and miserable, and are happy to demonize migrants, etc., etc. The list goes on. But the moment there was one issue which divided the elite, which, by the way, we all had to talk about for years because David Cameron, as I say, brought on that referendum for politically opportunistic reasons, we're now supposed to have sympathy with these people. Now, I don't. Of course, though, Vine isn't the only person looking for sympathy. Northern Ireland Minister and Brexit Spartan Steve Baker appeared on Newsnight after the announcement of the Windsor Framework. That's Sunak's deal with Ursula von der Leyen. Now, during that interview, this happened.
You were effectively excluded from these negotiations. You didn't really know the detail until this morning. Last night, you said you could have been on the verge of resignation.
Yes.
As Northern Ireland Minister, what do you think about the fact that you were excluded?
Well, when I saw the Prime Minister last night, he gave me the good reason why I was not included. It was a good and noble reason, which I am not in a position to share with you, and I hope people will understand that sometimes these things are necessary. But I actually feel regretful that I was a bear with a sore head over this. He had a good reason, and what's more, he's impressed upon me that actually, in a sense, I was present in the room because he did read the papers that I gave him, and they did influence what's been done, and I'm very proud of that.
You're emotional, Mr. Baker.
7 years of this cost me my mental health. The beard, the jewellery is about me, my recovery. In November 21, I had a major mental health crisis, anxiety and depression. I couldn't go on. People couldn't tell. I made a big keynote speech in the afternoon. But make no mistake, holding these tigers by the tail, Brexit, COVID recovery group, net zero scrutiny group, the tax stuff we did with Conservative Way Forward, took its toll. We're all only human. And the way I've led rebellions, no one should have to do. And this is an important moment for me personally, because I can authentically say, he's done it. If only everybody will read the text, think seriously about what an amazing achievement this is, what an incredible opportunity it provides for the people of Northern Ireland, and actually for the whole of Europe to move beyond this awful populism we've suffered. Just be sensible and grown up. Do the right thing by 1.9 million people. And the ripple effects for everybody else. You bet I'm emotional, because this book ends a 7-year chapter of my life, which I will be glad to close.
Now, I want to be careful here because I want to make clear I'm not going to doubt that he had some, emotional problems during this period. But all people in all different situations have emotional problems, whether or not it's because of things you agree with or disagree with. But when you listen to that list of rebellions which he has fought, which someone shouldn't have to fight. I mean, in a way, no one should have to fight them because they're bad rebellions to fight, right? He listed the COVID recovery group, net zero group, Euro research group. So these were all terrible lobby groups, right? So the COVID research group, they were the ones who, basically wanted to not do lockdowns and to kind of take COVID on the chin, very close to the Great Barrington Declaration. So the people who said, let's go for herd immunity early and quick, lots more people would have died. The net zero scrutiny group is essentially people saying net zero is too expensive, let's forget about climate change. And then the European research group was obviously, they were the people who wanted the hardest Brexit imaginable. So these are three really bad campaigns, that are going to cause a lot of pain and trauma if they get their way. I mean, on COVID they have. On Brexit they have. On COVID they didn't so much. On net zero, hopefully they won't. But if they get their way on net zero, which is to say scrap these targets, a lot more people are going to be living in very difficult situations where they're going to have mental health crises, which, I hazard to suggest are probably more serious than people who just had to do a bunch of rebellions in Westminster.
It just really shows, I think, the complete disconnection with the absolute chaos that ordinary people have been living under for the past several years. In that segment from Sarah Vine, she talks about, I'm so glad I'll never have to make that decision again about, whether to stand by my minister husband or my prime minister best friend. It's like the decision, like when we're talking about decisions that have had to be made as a result of this Brexit campaign that have huge gravity. It's like people who felt like they had to leave the country because it wasn't a welcoming place to them anymore. We're talking about migrant workers, many of whom are low wage, who have contributed huge amounts, who have made, the particularly like the nightlife and hospitality industry in this country possible, feeling like they have to leave because of how hostile it's. That's a real decision that is, traumatizing and requires sympathy. And Sarah Vine, I think, has very little sympathy for that, considering the paper that she writes for, which has a huge responsibility for creating those conditions. And that disconnection, it's like for Sarah Vine, it seems like the headlines here aren't, like food shortages and the loss of freedom of movement and how that's torn families and friendships apart in real, like concrete ways, and the kind of unbearable political stasis that we've been in, and the chaos and the spike in xenophobia and all that. No. Like the headline here is, I realized I don't really like my husband and I fell out with some of my friends. And it's just like, I wish that was, the main injury that we had all experienced as a result of the last few years. But it speaks to the way in which so many, and this, is reflective of like the class position of our media, and particularly prominent people in our media, is class shields them from the material realities and outcomes of policy. And this means that essentially they see this all as just like discourse. Like they just see this all as like discourse, like an exchange of opinions. And sometimes that exchange of opinions, becomes like hurts your feelings, or it becomes divisive. And it's like, no, this is like material realities that happen as a result of this discourse and of these conversations that you guys are seeing as kind of political point scoring. And in many ways, I think sometimes this idea that like Brexit created divisiveness, it tells me so much about how you've experienced living in this country. Because for me, what Brexit did was it brought to the fore a lot of contradictions and divisions, and to an extent toxicity that has been in the fabric of British life for a really long time now, and that has been felt by the sharp edges, at the sharp edges of our economic and political system. Migrants that have been routine, and refugees that have routinely been thrown under the bus in the name of a broader populism, and who have been, portrayed in ways that make them literally unsafe in their workplace and unsafe in the street. They have a very acute sense that Britain has been divided and has had this problem for a really long time. And it says so much to me that whilst, Brexit obviously did bring a lot of that to the fore, but it didn't invent that. And I think only if you're really disconnected from the reality of a lot of working class people can you sit there and say, oh, like, Brexit was that like horrible thing that made us all really divided and all, like kind of made things really unpleasant. Thank God we can close the door on that now, to see that as an aberration, rather than to see that actually it was kind of the coming to a head of issues that had been undergirding British life for a really long time, not least because of the contributions of the paper that Sarah Vine writes for.